Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nick and Laura. On today's episode, Laura and I talk about needing an executive producer. We talked to Sunny Fleming about GEO, the CEQ Policy Update, and developing industry standards. And finally, I saw a terrible thing about honeybees that they lose their sense of smell when it gets really hot, and I didn't like that. So here are some really fun facts about bees that are less terrible than that. So, did you know they could fly up to 15 miles an hour? That's like
Oh, wow.
faster than like the average person can run. So that's good to know. They can beat their wings about 11,400 times a minute, which is why them and all bugs have a buzzing sound, which is again kind of incredible. And then last but not least, oh gosh, they have two stomachs. So, you know, mm,
For
honeybees.
hunting, one for something else.
I don't, it doesn't say. It just says I feel like I really tapered off at the end there, but there you go. That's it. Honeybee facts for everybody. And yeah,
I wonder
it,
why they can go so fast. They just have to, they have a quota they have to meet.
I guess so. They're like need to get that food, and the only way to do it is to fly 15 miles an hour. It feels like us driving a car, right? Like there's no way we should not be going that fast. See, it feels the same for bees to me.
Right? Like maybe is it that
Yeah,
or is it like, cheetahs run fast for a reason.
yeah.
So fly
I mean, it's
fast
got to
because
be something.
get
But
through
like,
flowers every day.
yeah, who tries to kill a bee? It's got to be like food related. Well, if anyone knows, let us know. Why do bees fly so fast? That's
Yeah.
yeah.
I think we should mention the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
the one about us not being here for the last month and a half.
Oh, well, yeah, but don't we have to hit that music first?
Please do. I miss the music.
So, anyways, you're right, Laura. We do
Elephants
need to
in the
talk.
room.
Yeah, elephant in the room. So we've been off for a little bit. It's nice to have another episode drop here, but yeah, why don't you update folks on what's going on?
Well, we're just waiting for some policy changes, which is one of the topics for today, essentially for us. And
Yeah.
as the NAAP board meets again to figure out the direction they would like this podcast to go, which will be very similar to what it already is, but making it bigger, better, more more broadly available to people and more better marketed,
Mhm.
more better marketed.
More better
Then
marketing. Yeah, that's what we do. That's the name of our company. Oh my gosh. I think you just wrote a sponsor. That's what I heard.
speaking of Mo Betta, we are
Yeah.
looking for an executive producer to help us make
Yeah.
it.
And yeah, so I know it sounds funny. It's like, what does an executive producer do? And, in our minds, it's a couple of things, right? Some of it is content development, so helping us come up with ideas on, programs we should focus on, arenas that we should be looking into. But, a lot of other things too, like studio booking, which is a big one for us that we really, really want more support with. And having us on those logistics side of things, basically making the show run smoothly so that we can, uh, show up and be pretty, right? That's my goal every day. But basically trying to help us with those big logistics, including, like I say, content and booking. Those are pretty big for us. So I don't know if there's anything else on the top of your head that it would need, but
Well,
uh,
it's more on top of my head than your head. Oh, sick burn.
ouch. Never heard that before. But yeah, I think, keeping us on time, keeping us on track for scheduling is super, super important. It's one of the hardest things we do, truthfully. So if we have any support there, it's immense. And so, yeah, and we should have a budget for that next year as well. So please let us know if you're interested.
Yeah, so that content creation is a lot of invitation and seeking people out. So it's like benefits of the role is really networking, something to put on your resume, experience, a lot of good experience. And really learning some leadership and project management skills. So if that's something that you're looking to add to your resume, it's a good opportunity. And as Nick said, this will be paid. We're not looking for a free volunteer and very part-time. So if anyone is interested in applying for said position, then you can go ahead and send an email to info@environmentalprofessionalsradio.com.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's a nice supplement to whatever else you're doing, is the way I would put it. So
Don't get to
very
make fun
cool.
of Nick until you've worked with him for a while. That has to be a
Yeah,
benefit
yeah.
to
When ego can't take it, right? That's
say.
oh man. Yeah. Well, that's great. So why don't we wrap it up and head to our interview?
Hello and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Sunny Fleming, the Director of Environment, Conservation, and Natural Resource Solutions at Esri, and our resident data nerd on the show. Welcome back, Sunny.
Thank you so
Woo.
much. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome back. Isn't that a different title than you had last time we had talked to you?
Wow. Yes, that's a good catch. It certainly is. So I got a little bit of a promotion at Esri, and I'm very honored to be able to step into this role at Esri and take on these responsibilities. So yeah, throughout the time that we've recorded, you've kind of been tracking me through my career, and that's kind of a cool thing to think about, that we have these perspectives through time in this podcast with that. But I was a solution engineer for a long time at Esri, and then I started as an industry specialist, and now I'm an industry manager, or outwardly a director for environment, conservation, and natural resources solutions. So I'm pretty excited.
Woohoo, that's awesome.
So yeah, what does that mean in terms of responsibilities changing? Is it managing people? Is it managing more things? What is it?
Well, I think it's a recognition that, when I was an industry specialist, you're really getting your sea legs with what to do in this role. And it can be a lot of things, right? Managing our relationships with professional associations, helping to bring really good stories to light, helping to scale particular initiatives that we're interested in, that we think are important and strategic. And so I think it's really a recognition that, I've graduated in a bit. And so a lot of the responsibilities are very same and similar. But it gives me a little more autonomy to make some of these decisions on my own, and to really tackle some of these things a little more deeply. And that's really exciting to me. So
That's very cool. So are there any things that you can talk about that you have maybe like one of the first things you've been like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is where we're going to go for it. This is the thing that has going to have my name on it. Has that happened yet, or is that still kind of in the works?
yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually that mission has been something that I've carried since I came to Esri in the first place. And so that's really cool to be able to see this evolution of something that really drove me to work here in the first place, and now being recognized, by my peers and by my supers, and even by Jack himself, and kind of carrying that mission forward. And I would say the first thing I'm really passionate about, and what I'm going to be focused on moving into 2025 and beyond, is actually around regulatory processes and permitting, and how that work that we conduct as a community of environmental professionals actually has a lot of potential, and in helping other sectors of our environmental professionals, so like conservation, so like land and wildlife management, and how all these things can work together. So yeah, I'm going to be really focused on that for sure.
That's very, very cool. Um, well, I mean, how do I want to ask this to you? So I kind of want to talk through a little bit of like, maybe the framework of how that works. I know we're going to talk a little bit about eNEPA and how that kind of ties into this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So maybe actually we'll start there. We'll start talking about, how the CEQ has released a policy on how to modernize environmental reviews. And if we can tie that into how that will help conservation and other parts of what you're looking at later, I think that'd be pretty fun. So give us a little bit of a background on what CEQ released, and then we'll get into why on earth you read the whole thing, and then what it said. Okay, so give us a brief overview.
All right, that's great. I want to set some context, because I think this is kind of a fun story. CEQ released the report during the Esri user conference, actually.
Really?
And so I love that, because what was going on at the Esri user conference this year as CEQ was releasing this port, I kid you not, I cannot make these things up. Well, two things actually that are interesting. So the first thing is that Tim Waltz was one of our keynote speakers. So this was maybe 3 weeks before he was announced to the world as being a vice presidential nominee. So here at Esri, we're pretty excited. We're like, yeah, our stage launched a VP, which I don't think that these two situations were related at all, but it was pretty darn cool. And actually, he did an amazing job. And that whole week at the UC, people were buzzing about his keynote. But okay, the other thing though that was really cool, while CEQ was releasing this report, one of our other speakers on the Esri UC stage was the Crown Estate in the UK. And what they were talking about was really the pinnacle of what I would love to see our environmental community achieve here in the US. And it was looking at how they leverage GIS to deconflict site selection for renewable energy there. And it was a brilliant demonstration, because a lot of times when you're at a tech conference, right, you're showing the tech up on the screen and you're showing how it all works. And they had some of that, of course. But what they did was actually move around on the stage on this projected map and interacted with it to really show how issues of environmental sensitivity and rare and threatened species, but also site selection criteria, and all of these things can come together to help us deconflict where we're going to establish renewables. And I thought it was brilliant, because really this is fundamentally what the environmental review process is supposed to be doing, right? And we're a component of it. And so I just thought it was a fantastic example. And I encourage everyone to go look up that example, the Esri UC, and watch it, because I think that's where the CEQ report is going, is the direction in general in the US that we should be going. And I thought it was a fantastic example, and not just a theoretical example, which is where we've centered so much of this conversation to this point. So yeah, I want to encourage everyone to go look at that. Okay, so that was the context though, but you asked me, what's the summary? All right. So these days, I know, and I know Laura did this, right? We can all go ask ChatGPT for the summary, and that's all good and great.
This is two very different approaches here.
Yeah,
you're like word for word. I'm like, give me the high level 5-minute review. Let's go.
So I actually thought, shout out to CEQ who wrote the report, because I think they have a fantastic executive summary that is worth everyone going and reading. But really what they were trying to do is help derive recommendations, of course, as it says in the title, to Congress, but also I think the audience is broader than that. It's our whole industry, on what needs to happen in order to realize a vision of an e-NEPA process. And what is e-NEPA? Well, it's looking at how can we leverage cloud technology and real IT infrastructure to help streamline these processes, but also facilitate collaboration and a whole host of other capabilities that we really need to start looking at if we want to come together and help streamline the environmental permitting process. And so I love their recommendations. One of the first ones is really obvious, right? And it's very core to how data works together. And that's, we got to have some standards. You know, if we've got Excel spreadsheets are really intuitive for people to understand, right? If you have an Excel spreadsheet and you've got 4 columns and you need it to match up with someone else's Excel spreadsheet, well, you send them the same spreadsheet with the columns already pre-written, pre-named, right? You know, maybe state, city, zip code. And those headers are all named the same thing. So everyone knows what they're filling out, right? Well, that same process and that same concept needs to be applied to e-NEPA if we're going to really think about how we use tools such as GIS to collaborate on this. We have no standards here. We have no data standards. And that's really preventing us from being able to create interoperable systems and talk across agencies and with our stakeholders. So that was one of the first recommendations, but there's a few others as well. Specifically, they call out leveraging geospatial information. So you can imagine, I get really excited about that because it is finally this realization that the things that we do are innately geographic, and therefore it only behooves us to look at geographic information systems that speak to that directly. Because without that geographic context, you're missing a whole host of information that's extremely valuable to making decisions.
Yeah. So, okay. Trying to think about that in terms of like, like you say, I've seen more, story maps being used as part of the NEPA process, and that's actually a really nice way of showing, hey, this is where things are. This is how long it is. This is how big it is. Here's a reference for you right away. You don't have to read this entire, I hope my bosses aren't listening, boring report. Here's a much more fun interactive map. So you're not only, in my mind, you're not only using the GIS system, but you're also, well, using GIS, you're actually also simplifying it for people so that they understand it and they can actually respond in a better way. So that's kind of the next step here.
That's something I talk about with the power of GIS all the time, especially as it relates to our community of environmental professionals. Many of us are scientists, and that's our job.
Yeah.
But we do need to understand how we can communicate our specific knowledge in a way that is accessible for the everyday audience without diluting the science itself. And GIS is really powerful for doing that because it's so visual. It's a map. And people are able to understand a map much more intuitively than they can a graph or a chart or a spreadsheet. And so that use of story maps and more of the public engagement tools, it makes sense to me that that's been the place where a lot of people have started to, I call it the gateway drug for GIS. Story maps, they're just so easy to make.
Yes.
And they're so easy to help communicate a story. And so it's a very intuitive place for people to start dipping their toe into capabilities of GIS that go beyond just making a map. And actually, one thing when I was reading this report, I think the term GIS is used like 101 times or something throughout the report. I just did a quick search. I was kind of blown away by that. But then when I started digging into the report, a lot of the examples that they showed from within our community, federal examples, state examples, local government examples, almost every single one of them incorporated GIS somehow, some way. Yeah. And so I don't think they intentionally did this, but what I felt this report did was showcase the wide breadth of ways that GIS is used throughout this process. Yeah. Not just to, embed in a map and show where something's at, but really to help facilitate understanding. And I loved that. Of course, I loved that. I'm definitely very biased there, but yeah, it was great.
Well, yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because I think for me, sometimes maps can be really powerful, right? Like you the demographics of an area, right? But when you put them on a map, you're like, oh, there is one set of group of people that is here, another set that is there, and there is almost no one in the middle, right? It's just kind of like this really stark, powerful thing, right? And you can see it immediately. I don't have to explain it. I don't have to say anything other than read the legend of the map, and oh, we have an issue integrating this city. The city is very separated, and that's really, really fascinating work. So is it kind of like trying to design more things like that so you see those softer, maybe less quantitative things come through?
Yeah, and that, yes, partly. There's a really interesting factoid that I started including in my presentations when I speak to folks. And it is that the human brain is able to process information 60,000 times faster with visuals than it is with reading. And so I actually like to think about this in the context of, maybe the anxiety we feel when we craft an email to someone who's high up, right? And so we want to be able to convey the most important information using the least amount of words in the most succinct way, right? And if I think about it from that perspective, then visuals make a lot of sense, right? It conveys the most important amount of information, allows the person to discern patterns and understand more complex things than if we were to write it out in a sentence. And so in your example of demographics, that's definitely one thing, right? Bringing demographics together, and you see pretty quickly, no matter what city you look at or what region of the US or the globe that you look at, there's really strong geographic patterns with how people live and where they live and why they congregate together. And sometimes those things beg other questions. And this is really important when we're thinking about environmental justice and climate justice, because then once we've understood the human geography, we can layer on the environmental geography and see the relationships and patterns there, which start to inform policy decisions. And so it's a really powerful tool, because if you're to do that with a spreadsheet, it's gonna take a significantly higher level of effort to discern that same information than if you were to map it. You could still do it, sure, but it would take you longer, and it's miserable. Who wants to look at
Yeah.
maps are beautiful.
So my main takeaway from that is if I want to double my salary, I should make a chart and give that to my bosses. That's what I heard you say.
Not a chart, a map.
A map. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. Who am I talking to? I should know better. So yeah, I mean, like, so the digital world and kind of bringing that together to kind of help us do some of what we're doing is really it's nice. So like, but where's like you say, like, story maps are like the gateway. What's the next thing beyond that? Where should we be going with our reviews?
That's a great question. I think historically, and this is kind of just part of how the technology has evolved along with our industry, but historically, and even to this day, the pervasive way of thinking about GIS is that it's a map. And so you have the person that makes the map, right? But story maps, and the reason I say it's kind of the gateway drug, that goes beyond making a map. That goes more into understanding and telling a story. And that's just one component. It's one pattern of use, right? Is collaboration and communication. But what else do we do in our industry? Well, we go out into the field and we collect information, or we have sensors scattered on facilities or elsewhere that are collecting air quality information or logging water flow, right? Well, that's all data that's coming in, and it's all innately spatial. So GIS also supports that component of our workflow. So now we've got three major things. We've got in the field collecting data, GIS is used there. We have in-office analysis and crunching of that data. That's GIS right there. That's core GIS that everyone knows and loves. But then there's the communication and collaboration side of things. And in between all of that, there's a complex layering of people that have to interact with this information. So when we're thinking about this from the permitting process, maybe you have the lead agency, right? But they have to collaborate and communicate with other agencies who may have authoritative information that are required for this. And GIS can actually help facilitate that process. It can literally say, okay, person, you have checked off this step. Now can we automate pinging the next person on the step that they need to take? Well, those are core capabilities now of GIS that I think we may not think about classically. Right. So when we look at eNEPA and we look at any permitting process, we now actually have a holistic enterprise business system that's built on the power of geography that can facilitate this soup to nuts to bolts to whatever they call it, right? The whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle. And so I'm really excited to see that recognition coming to light here in this particular document.
Yeah, and it's funny. I will say, like, one of the most invaluable things is having someone who can do multiple things, right? So can go in the field, take the data, come back from the field and be like, or even explain, first of all, explain it in the field to people who don't know, right? And am I saying we have this person at Dawson? Yes, I am. And I'm not telling you her on purpose because, she's great and I want her to stay here. But it's invaluable to explain, hey, I'm taking these points because when we go to permitting, and I show them on a map that this is where the floodplain is, they don't have to, they can cross-reference the data they already have, corroborate it with what we are giving them, and then that permit process for your whatever is so much easier.
Oh yeah.
Um, and sometimes we are still at the behest of the regulators. Like that's just something that's always going to be the case. They will see things differently, but the data we use and how we present it makes our argument much stronger. So it's one of those things that I think if you have someone say, "Well, this isn't, we're not going to give you a permit for X, Y, Z," and we're like, "Well, here's the reason why this is this will work, and this is where we are going to impact and how much, and we are willing to mitigate, based on your recommendations, blah blah blah, blah, right?" So it
Yeah.
does all tie together. That is super. See, I'm getting excited just talking about it.
I'm glad. I want everyone to be this excited about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is exciting, but it is also, I think, Nick, what you said about the generalists. So when I'm speaking to early career professionals or recent graduates, a lot of their thing is like, well, I'm not a specialist. I don't, of course, early career, when you start, you're not a specialist typically, unless you went to school for specifically whale biology and you studied underneath a whale professor and you did your dissertation on whales. Then you
Right,
graduate as a subject matter expert. But most people graduate as generalists, and then they are kind of like forced into or told they need to pick something. And I think this is a good case for that, for someone who likes to do multiple things, to pick it up and run with it, because there are so many of us, myself included. I want to learn everything. I want to know how to do everything, and I can. And people look at you like, how could you be multi-talented and know all this stuff? It is possible to have multi-talent as a talent.
Yes. Yeah.
It is. There's 2 points I want to bring to the table on that. And one, as you two are speaking, I'm finding this really interesting. And it's actually something that I also want to start changing the dialogue on, is that GIS is a skill that is owned by a couple people within an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to make that thought go away. GIS is something that, whether we know it or not, we're probably interacting with already. Oh, yeah. And therefore, it's supporting all different kinds of personas within an organization, whether it's even, a front desk secretary picking up a phone from a constituent being asked about, issue X, Y, or Z, right? That individual should be able to immediately say, oh, well, you live here, here's what's going on in your area. All of those are very spatial questions. And oh, by the way, here's the public hearing that's going to be 5 minutes away from your house, that kind of thing. But also then provide that individual, the constituent, with that same information, that same link. That same data can also be utilized by someone who's as high up as a commissioner or secretary to be briefed on what's going on in a particular congressional region or a legislative region when they're going to travel and they have to speak to these certain issues, right? But behind all that scenes, I want to change the thought process on GIS as a single person and we're loading them up with building all of this. No, if we're going to take this seriously, we have to think about GIS in the same way that we think about Microsoft, and that being an enterprise business system that is installed on everyone's computer and they interact with it at the ways and levels that are appropriate to their roles. Mm-hmm. And that's something I kind of want to move into thinking about it that way. And even the CEQ document, it's funny, I mentioned, there are some things that puzzle me, and I see some of that tension within this document itself. They kind of separate GIS technology out from some of these other technologies. And there's a tension with that versus all of the examples they show that really showcase the breadth of it. Yeah. And so it's like, no, it's not a separate thing. This is actually something that we interact with as intimately as we do, Microsoft now, or our web browser, or any of this, right? And it's not really a separate thing. It's integral to all of these different workflows and the things that we have to touch on.
It's funny, you talk about like different people using GIS for different reasons, right? And I think so like I use it too. Like I literally will pull up a map of an area that we're proposing on, right? And I will see, okay, how big is this site really? Where is it? What's around it? Like I will look at the aerial, see, does a stream go through here? Can I tell that there's maybe some wetlands here, there, or whatever? because that impacts how we're even going to bid on something, right? And to do that to our GIS team would be a waste of their time, but it's really, really valuable for me. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so this allows me to say, of the, 100 acres I'm looking at, about, there's a stream that runs through about, 500 feet of it, which is pretty small. So that doesn't mean too much for me. So, XYZ just compounds how we are going to build out that thing. And that also will impact how we permit it after the fact, right? If we win the project, now we know, okay, we've got a stream to look at, but we have to look at the whole site too. That means walking 100 acres. That will take time, right? I mean, like, so all these things start adding up, and it's kind of neat to see all the way through to the end of that process when you have to get the permit for the thing that you want to build. And that's also very much informed on what we did during that process. So it's really cool to see how that's all being talked about. So you're right. I mean, that's totally how, like, I would say most businesses are using that kind of information and they don't even know it, right? It's not even, people aren't
Yeah.
even thinking about it sometimes.
Yeah. It's a very natural and intuitive thing, but the downside of that is it's always been kind of seen as that commodity, not
Right.
as intimate to our business as it really should be and is. So yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, how do we change that then? How do we get it to be a spot where we have everybody doing it? Is it like through school? Is it through, like, we have to wait 10 more years for everyone else to catch up, or how do we do it?
That's a great question, and I would say the answer to that question is why I have this job in the first place. So partly it's my job. It's my job to be able to change things and help us understand what this can look like. But that's part of the reason I'm so heartened to see this report come out,
Yeah.
because we need this report to come out. It's the first step is that as an industry, we need to understand and think about and start talking about technology.
Yeah.
And one of the question I was kind of thinking about as I was reading this report, I was so excited at first. And part of that excitement was because I was like, oh my God, it's finally here. We're finally talking about it.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
I had to, that kind of begs the question of, well, why haven't we talked about this before? And I think the reason we haven't talked about it before as an industry and through the perspective of policy is because policymakers are very comfortable talking about policy.
Yep.
And so when we talk about this concept of streamlining permitting, it is natural that policymakers go to their strength to tackle a problem from that perspective. So you've always seen this conversation about streamlining permitting go to a policy area. And we saw that even with this latest iteration of talking about this, right? People immediately go to policy, and then it actually becomes, kind of contentious. There's the camp that wants to push for deregulation because
Right.
they see that as a policy problem. And then there's the camp that says, no, these processes are super important, and they look at it from a policy perspective. Well, then there's us GIS nerds going, hey guys, if we can actually think about this through the lens of technology and how we can address this challenge through the lens of technology, we can actually maybe have our cake and eat it too. We can both streamline the process and reduce the delays in this, but also while still maintaining and managing and protecting the resource that we're tasked to manage. In fact, probably do it better, and everyone's going to be happier. And so I'm laughing because I'm like, oh, why hasn't this happened before? But I think that's why. I think we just, policymakers think about it through policy, and only recently have they thawed to the idea of thinking about it through technology. And I'm excited. I'm really excited to see that. I'm excited to see it. It's like the guy with the red stapler in the basement finally got invited to dinner,
You're right. Well, I can think of like some other real world applications of how I see that. And so for example, like if you have an area that's been surveyed, right? You know that it's been surveyed, but it was surveyed by an agency. We'll just say,
Yes.
put it out there. Oh, an agency surveys the area. They don't actually do anything. They just have the survey, right? A separate agency wants to use that agency's data and information. They don't even know that it exists.
Yeah.
So they're actually also going out there surveying the same exact area that's already been surveyed. So in biology, maybe that's a little bit okay because things change. It's a little bit more dynamic. But for like cultural resources, for example, knowing where those sites are, is extremely helpful. And knowing what you have to know ahead of time can
Mhm.
save people dollars, time, energy, effort, right? So even if
Absolutely.
there's a database where all that information is, and a lot of times SHPOs have that, but there's still a challenge of, well, do we need to survey this area? Has it been surveyed before? And you can't just answer that blindly. You need to look at the information that exists
Yeah.
where you may not have access to. So that's the challenge. And I wish it was easier to get information because I
And
know
Well,
there's a ton out
a
there.
lot of people go ahead, Laura, you're going to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna say that goes right back to what you said at the beginning about data standardization from a user's perspective who has worked in that exact space.
Yeah.
That is probably what the next hurdle, because if two agencies go out and collect it, what time of year was it? Was it done in a day, a week? Or are they collecting in inches? Or
Who actually did it?
are you collecting metadata at all? Somebody
Yeah.
might do a really good job, with all of that stuff, and other people maybe just going out and writing on a clipboard and hand entering it later. Am I using
Gosh, yeah.
a Trimble that has accuracy data, or am I just like
Yeah.
winging it? And then are you reporting into the database into if it's like CO2, I don't remember the differences anymore. I'm not going to say I do, but like I can collect the data in completely different standards, and they're just not going to mesh up. We worked with the Water Atlas on doing this, and they were tasked with collecting the different, pulling all the different data pools around from the Tampa Bay area from the different agencies that collected. And EPC had 40 years plus, now going on 50 years worth of data in the Tampa Bay area, which is fantastic. But the data collected even 10 years ago doesn't have the same metadata or quality analysis that it has now. So like you can't even compare one set of data with its own past data.
Yeah.
And those are things like if you are a non-scientist and you pull the data to use it and you don't understand this, so then there's a second issue. You've got data standardization, but you don't understand how data works. You could be saying all kinds of things that are not true based on what you visually think is true.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it's very loaded, and the devil is in the details. And I think you all bring up really important points. And that's why I think I was so gleeful about the first recommendation being data and content standards. And some of those things, like how we evolve information through time and how it becomes better, and we have to crosswalk that with historic information, that's always going to be something that we have to tackle. Yeah. But one of the things, and it's kind of started, Nick, you're talking about this, right? Like, oh my gosh, what if we knew some of this information had already been surveyed up front? And some of this, it's very sensitive information, right?
Yes,
especially historic preservation information, rare species information. But again, we don't have to just expose raw data, right? We can still tell people while they're making decisions about where they want to site their project, what the level of effort may be based on maybe a parcel level aggregation of site characteristics. Yep. Okay, we know there's cultural resources here. That's going to kick up the level of effort X amount. Okay, we know that there's rare species within a mile radius. That's going to kick up level of effort here amount. All of those things tie back directly to the kinds of permits and processes and pre-construction reviews that are required. And so can we aggregate that information in such a way that it helps not just regulators, and it helps not just those of us in industry necessarily, but really helps us make decisions about how we want to conduct life in our societies.
Oh man.
And so it can benefit everyone again, right? Like this could actually be a great thing. And I think about this even through the lens of like agriculture. Like let's even make it less complex than trying to cite big renewable energy things, right? Let's just talk about it from the perspective of a farmer. Well, you've got a parcel, maybe there's some wetlands on that thing. Are they degraded? Yeah. Have you been farming over it forever? Yeah. But is your yield suffering because the characteristics of that part of your parcel are not appropriate for the agriculture that you're doing or the crop that you're growing? Yeah. And so can we use spatial characteristics to help with things like precision agriculture? And everyone benefits. The farmer benefits, subsidies benefit you. Like there's all of these financial, economic, social, all these reasons to do this that benefits everyone. It's not just it should not be a partisan.
Shouldn't be partisan. Yeah. I'll tell you, like, it's so much of like, my job is often, it's not necessarily saying we can't do something, right? Because time is one of the most important assets to almost any project. And you talk to anyone who's doing anything, they'll be like, how fast can you do this without,
Time is money.
lighting the world on fire, right? But I've seen examples where I say, look, I don't have to survey this area to tell you that it's critical habitat listed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. If you want to construct in there, which is possible, just gonna keep moving the time out. So you tell me what you're comfortable with, and I'll tell you if that's okay. If you want to take 5 years to do it, sure. That's probably what we're going to be dealing with right now. So if you don't want to do that and you want to go somewhere else, it may quote unquote be a longer route or a different. You put it in a different location, but ultimately it'll be much faster.
Yeah.
And it's just because even if you're not impacting it, right? Even the perception of it is also real. So if you're just updating a building, maybe it's not a big deal. But if you're building something new in an area that doesn't have it, I mean, that's going to take way more time. You move it over here, it'll take a lot less time.
Yeah.
Still has a similar impact to the environment, but far less with the, on the policy side. You don't have to jump through as many hoops. And sometimes that's the simplest way to influence how agencies work, how you do a project.
Yes. Love it.
Yeah, I know,
you all
right?
are as excited as I am.
So I don't know, like to summarize all this before because I know we want one or two other things before you go. Is there any recommendations that you have about how we kind of tackle these goals moving forward? Anything in your brain that's you want to get out there?
Whew. Well, I think my first instinct and the thing that I want to say is that I'm super excited about it. And this CEQ report, right? It's a report to Congress, but the way I'm taking it is not as a report to Congress so much as it is a call to action for our entire industry. And that I think we really need to come together and take these recommendations seriously and just already start getting to work on it. I think that's going to position us really well. And I think that's because why do we need to wait for congressional action to do our work better in a way that supports everyone's missions better? And so I see this really as a call to action. And I think of the professional associations that we're part of, right? We have the National Association of Environmental Professionals. This brings together a lot of folks in the AEC, environmental consulting firms. We have associations that bring together public sector on this. And we're all kind of talking around these issues. But man, let's roll up our sleeves and get our hands a little dirty. And this gives us kind of a roadmap on where to start. There's no reason we can't bring together our CIOs that represent these different industry sectors together and talk about what a schema or a standard might look like. Like, let's just start doing it.
Yeah.
So I get really excited about that. And, one thing that I'm excited about, I keep kind of honing in on the standards and schema. It's the first recommendation and it's the most needed, I think. But the reason I'm excited about it is because, so here at Esri, and a lot of different companies do that. This isn't just Esri, but here at Esri, we have something called ArcGIS solutions. And these are basically empty templates that we build for industry specific challenges. And the template that I want to build for an industry specific challenge is based on the environmental review and permitting process. And we have one, it's really old and it needs to be updated. And we're already working on updating it. So we're going to release that in fall. But the thing is that it's still going to be just it's going to speak to a very general pattern, but it's not going to have the backbone of a standard that I think we're all really hungry to see happen.
Yeah.
And so creating that standard actually helps spur innovation, right? All of a sudden, Esri and all of our competitors would be able to take that schema and start building solutions around it. But then it becomes less of a competition and it's more about interoperability, right? Everyone that can help provide solutions in the private sector would suddenly be working on a schema and a standard that could allow us to create interoperable systems that support different kinds of things that maybe one agency needs to focus on something more than another, right? And so that really excites me. That really excites me, and I'm like dying to have a seat at that table, and, be able to help facilitate that process.
Oh my gosh, can I be there too? Because I'm telling you, like I'm having to share data across systems also, and it's like, okay, well, I took your data and I put it in the system and everything crashed. I'm like, okay. What
Well,
did you take? And oh my gosh.
Some systems are built better than others, but the schema is very important.
Yes, I know. Oh man. Okay. All right. Enough.
So this leads to the other thing we wanted to talk about real quick was the GEO AI, because I feel like that's going to be limited in certain areas before there's a standard too, because I know someone who's built like a private AI based mapping software, and like I tried it out and it was cute. That's what I can say about it. I'm not going to say who it was or what it was, but it was cute. Someone who doesn't know, like,
and mindful. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, it was very demure and mindful. But did I get what I needed out of a map when I say, please create me a map that does this and shows me that and whatever? And it was like, okay, here's your 4 locations across the nation. Like that. Yeah. Not what I'm looking for.
So Laura, you used a word earlier, and I was just like, I was so impressed because it's actually key to moving forward on this. GEO AI is also discussed, well, AI generally is discussed in this report as well. And I love everyone's on the hype train about AI right now. And you used a word earlier called, you said metadata. And metadata.
Yeah, remember that? Remember big data too? Big data. Oh, it's big data time.
Well, metadata is extremely important. Metadata is the key to making AI work, because what AI is doing effectively is just crawling metadata to understand what sources it can bring to bear to answer certain questions. And I have a really good example of this that we demonstrated. I actually specifically asked our team, I wanted to have a demo that failed. And I know this sounds crazy, right? But I wanted a demo that failed. Right now at Esri, we are looking at AI systemically across the platform. How can we leverage this across all of our different tools and applications to facilitate this? And so we started with something called ArcGIS Hub, which is like our open data platform for people to build their open data sites on. And open data is what it is, right? It is data that is open, but in order to discover that information and use it, you have to have solid metadata, which for our listeners is data about the data. So I have a, let's take NWI, for example.
Right.
Here's NWI. Well, NWI we know is a wetlands data set, but what's the metadata behind it? The metadata tells us how NWI is derived, what it does and does not speak to, so its limitations, its scope, right? A national lens of of wetlands data. All of these things is what metadata speaks to, and AI feeds off metadata. So one thing that I laugh about, and the demo that I had them build that failed, was actually around wetlands. So we took an existing open data portal, and I won't say whose it was. This is a real life example. And we applied AI to their ArcGIS Hub. And I did a similar exercise as you did, Laura. I asked it to show me where wetlands were in the state. And it returned maybe 100 wetlands that were all centered around a specific city, and which we know is wrong. Right. The wetlands were not restricted to a city within the state. We knew there was more than that. So I was able to deduce, okay, this is obviously wrong. I then asked it, oh, okay, well, can you show me where like some trails are that would take me to see wetlands, right? Mm-hmm. And it did pretty good with that. And then I asked it a slightly different question about wetlands. And it returned a completely different result than it did when I first asked a question about wetlands. Right. So when I looked under the hood and I actually went to their site directly, I realized that they had 2 data sets that were both named wetlands. Mm. And the metadata for both of those data sets was exactly the same, but the data within those data sets was vastly different. And
Oh, wow.
so the AI was picking up and making wrong decisions because of pure human error.
Right.
Yes.
So when people talk about AI and they talk about their fear of AI, they're actually talking about the fear of human folly, because AI is a direct reflection of us and our behaviors,
Right.
which is probably the most frightening thing about AI, in my opinion. It is not that the robots are going to form their own consciousness and take over the world. It is that the robots might form their own consciousness and take over the world based on behaviors they learn from us.
Right.
Exactly.
Biases. Yep. Oh, yeah.
And so this actually ties to something called what's called the Gartner hype curve. And I love the Gartner hype curve. And if you're familiar, Gartner is the, big company, and they put out reports on different companies and things like that. They're a huge company. But one of the concepts that they came up with a while back, and I don't know if it was specific to AI or not, was what they call the Gartner hype curve. And this is when some new technology or some new word starts to enter our cultural lexicon, and we all jump onto it and we get super excited. And so you can imagine if we're putting this on an XY chart, and X is our excitement and Y is time, right? So we're at 0. A new term comes out, we all get hyped about it. Boom. That line on that chart goes up to 100. We're all stoked. Oh, and then it peaks because we actually start implementing it and we realize that it's not quite doing what we want it to do. So that X value starts to decrease a little bit over time, and we start to enter the trough of disappointment, which is a hilarious term. It reminds me of like the swamp in the Never-Ending Story, the swamp of
Right.
sadness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then as time moves on, though, we realize, okay, now that we've been disappointed by this thing that we thought could do more than it could, we now know its limitations, and we start to actually make it productive, and we start to improve upon it. And that's the plateau of productivity. And that's where we're at right now with AI. We are entering the trough of disappointment. We're super stoked about it. We know it's a thing. We know it can do cool stuff for us. We've got to start thinking about it. Oh, but it hasn't quite met what we wanted it to do. And now how do we move forward, really thinking about how we leverage this in a realistic sense? So that's where we're at right now.
Well, it's like it reminds me of, like, my favorite example of that is the who scored the most goals in international goals in soccer, and it shows like Ronaldo and who scored the most goals for men, but he's not the highest goal scorer. So it's like the bias of AI was there. And if you try to do it again now, all of those reports will say, well, I mean, it's Ronaldo, but it's not. It still lists Ronaldo first, even though he's not the. It's just a very funny way to see that bias come out.
Oh yeah, and implicit bias with AI has been discussed through a lot of lenses, largely social lenses, but it's certainly something to consider when we're thinking about leveraging AI for environmental issues. If we have a wetlands data set that tells me there's only 100 wetlands in the state, that's a problem.
Yeah.
The decisions that someone makes based off knowing there's 100 wetlands versus more, versus how sensitive they are, versus the scope, right, is very different. And so that's kind of a trite example, but it's a very real example.
Yeah, and I would say, like, honestly, like, a lot of people who are making decisions don't know that there's more than 100 wetlands in a state, for example. I mean, we've had people talk in public forums about, if you put too many people on an island, would the island tip over? And sometimes that's where people are, right? That's just where they are. You're like, oh, they're serious. You know what I mean? Like, so it is really important for it to be right, or to be as unbiased as possible. But we also have to have people that know that it has those challenges, because
Yeah.
you need someone in the room that knows that and understands it.
And again, all these concepts come up in their report, and I was just really impressed by that. They talk about AI, but they talk about the importance of metadata. They talk about these standards, all stuff that I know sounds really dry, but it's critical. It's critical for us moving forward and seeing what our modern future could look like as environmental professionals.
Man, that's a really great spot to end, I think, right there, on all those big things. I know before we let you go, I do want to ask if you have anything fun going on otherwise, beyond data. What else are you working on? What else are you doing?
Well, there's quite a bit that I'm doing in my professional life, but one thing that I am especially proud of is that I was nominated recently unanimously to the board of directors at NatureServe. And I think I've talked about NatureServe on every podcast that you all have interviewed me on. I somehow find a way to weave them into the conversation.
Yeah.
And I know you all have interviewed even some of their staff in the past as well. But I'm very much endeared to this organization. My first job out of college was with the Tennessee Division of Natural Areas as a heritage biologist. And Tennessee Division of Natural Areas is one of many organizations that make up what's called the NatureServe Network here in the US and Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And that really drove me to understanding that I had a passion at the intersection of technology, policy, and the environment, that job. And I owe that passion and that enlightenment to the NatureServe Network and NatureServe. But now that I work at Esri, I've been able to really see even more of the impact of the work that they do, that I didn't quite have that same perspective when I was working in a single state. And so they've been an important theme throughout my entire career. So to now be nominated to their board of directors and be able to be a part of that and collaborate with them in that kind of way is just a huge honor for me. And I'm really looking forward to what we do together moving forward.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Really, really is. But yeah, I mean, it's like I say, it's always great talking to you, Sunny. I know we've got to let you go, unfortunately, but where can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out?
Well, I'm always on LinkedIn. I absolutely love LinkedIn. So definitely reach out to me there. If you're brave, you can email me. But man, email gets away from you. So yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me. So Sunny Fleming on LinkedIn, Fleming with one M.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Sunny, so much. Love having you on.
All right. Thanks.
And that's our show. Thank you so much, Sunny, for joining us this week. We are not on every Friday yet, but we will be back to our regularly scheduled program soon enough. Until then, please keep listening and subscribing. See you, everybody.
Bye.